Welcome to the Laughter Cabinet, where the jokes are always flowing and the good times never stop.
The edge of laughter. There was a certain poetry in failure. Eddie Malone had stumbled upon it unbidden, like a punchline whispered in a dream too strange to forget. The club, the Laughter Cabinet, pulsed around him, a living entity shaped by the chaos of his bombing. Tonight, he stood on the dim stage, the spotlight a harsh, solitary beacon that felt less like illumination and more like a spotlight under a microscope. He could almost hear the universe holding its breath, waiting to see what would break first, the club or Eddie himself. He cleared his throat, fingers trembling slightly as he grasped the microphone. Why don't scientists trust atoms? He began, voice low and cracking under the weight of expectation and self-loathing. A pause, pregnant with the anticipation of a punchline that had long since lost its charm. Because they make up everything. The joke landed with a thud, no laughter, just an eerie silence punctuated by the faintest ripple in the air. Eddie's eyes darted across the room as the edges of reality began to blur. Chairs in the front row shimmered, their wooden legs folding and unfolding like origami, morphing into delicate paper cranes that fluttered away before his very eyes. A glass of water on the bar rippled, then condensed into a bright orb of light, hovering midair before dissolving into tiny sparks. From the wings, Lola Sparks' sharp gaze never wavered. Her brightly dyed hair framed a face that balanced skepticism and awe, a living contradiction much like the club itself. She whispered under her breath, "You re-pushing it, Eddie. This isn't just a joke anymore. It's a cosmic punchline." Eddie swallowed the lump in his throat. "What if I bomb so hard I break the punchline?" He muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Behind the scenes, Moss leaned heavily on his cane, the bowler hat casting a shadow over his keen eyes. His voice was a rasp dry as old leaves. "Comedic chaos, when untethered, is a terrible thing," he said, half to himself, half to the room. "It's like juggling knives made of rubber bands, fun until one snaps, and then you, left bleeding laughter." Silas, hunched at the soundboard, fingers dancing over dials and sliders, added a faint electronic warble that seemed to warp the very air. His magic was subtle but potent, bending the club's reality with a deft touch that made the impossible seem like an everyday trick. Eddie's next joke was a deliberate disaster. Why did the chicken cross the envious strip? He shouted into the microphone, voice cracking and raw. "To get to the same side?" The club shuddered. Walls breathed, colors bleeding into each other like wet paint on canvas. The audience's faces twisted and stretched, expressions flickering between laughter, confusion and terror. The boundary between performer and spectator blurred. Laughter rippled like a living thing, wild and untamed, threatening to tear the fragile fabric of the club apart. Lola's voice cut through the chaos.
Eddie!
"Stop. You're not just bombing, you're destabilizing the whole place." He grinned, ironically, the tired smile of a man who'd learned to find hope in his failures. "Maybe it's time the joke bombed the joke," he said, voice trembling with reckless daring. But Moss was already moving, whispering riddles about balance and the thin line between creation and destruction. Silas twisted knobs, trying to anchor the club's reality before it spiraled completely out of control. The night stretched on, a surreal dance of cosmic punchlines and twisted realities. Eddie pushed further, each failed joke a hammer against the walls of convention, each bomb a spark setting the stage for a new kind of performance. The club became a playground of absurdity, a place where the impossible bent and bowed to the power of laughter and its darker twin, chaos. And as the last echoes of his bombing faded into the night, Eddie felt something shift deep within him. The edge of laughter was a precipice, and he was teetering on it, ready to fall or fly. But one thing was certain: the world and the Laughter Cabinet would never be the same again. The question hung in the air, heavy and electric. How far could he push the joke before the laughter turned to silence? The Laughter Cabinet throbbed with a surreal pulse that night, a heartbeat caught between laughter and menace, as Eddie Malone stepped into the dim spotlight. The crowd's murmurs mingled with the faint scent of stale beer and sweat, their faces a kaleidoscope of anticipation and unease. Somewhere beyond the flickering stage lights, the walls themselves seemed to breathe, shadows stretching and contracting like the breaths of some sleeping beast. Eddie's gaze swept over the audience, but his real focus was the figure that had just entered the room, the cold silhouette of Victor Crane. Victor stood tall and impossibly composed, his sharply tailored suit an anachronism amid the club's haphazard decor. His eyes, icy and calculating, locked onto Eddie with a ferocity that made the air around him seem to chill. The smirk curling on Victor's lips was a constant reminder of the power he sought to seize, a power that could either order the chaotic heart of the laughter cabinet or snuff it out entirely. So Victor's voice cut through the ambient buzz like a razor. The washed-up jester thinks he can play with forces beyond his understanding. Eddie swallowed his nerves, the familiar sting of self-doubt gnawing at him. But beneath it, a flicker of resolve sparked. This was the moment he had been spiraling toward, the moment where failure might finally mean something more. He stepped forward, the stage creaking underfoot, and faced the expectant crowd. Then, with a wry, ironic smile, he launched into his first joke, a deliberately bad, clumsy setup that fell flat in the most spectacular way. The silence was immediate and profound, a vacuum of expectation, and then the magic happened. Props on the stage began to warp and twist, defying physics. A microphone stand melted into a writhing serpent of tangled cords. The spotlight flickered, shifting hues from harsh white to a dizzying spectrum. Audience members blinked, their faces distorting like reflections in a funhouse mirror, laughter mixing with confusion in an uneasy symphony. Victor's eyes narrowed. He stepped onto the stage, his tone icy but laced with mockery. Chaos is amusing, Malone, but ultimately it's a game for children. Order is where true power lies. With a sharp, measured wit, Victor unleashed his own set of punchlines, each precise, cutting, designed to impose structure rather than topple it. The club's reality responded accordingly. The warped stage began to straighten, colors sharpened into harsh clarity, and the once fluid air grew taut and brittle, like a glass bubble stretched to its breaking point. The battle was on. Eddie's mind raced. Every failed joke was a calculated strike, a ripple sent through the fabric of the club's reality. He felt the exhilarating chaos swell under his skin, a dangerous but intoxicating power. Victor, with his cold precision, pushed back relentlessly, attempting to cage the wildness with his ironclad order. Their duel was less performance and more cosmic dance, meta jokes and layered punchlines dancing on the edge of absurdity and menace. The club responded in kind, its walls cracking and shimmering, lights fracturing into kaleidoscopic patterns that dazzled and disoriented simultaneously. At one point, Eddie's ironic smile met Victor's unyielding smirk in a silent wager, a clash of philosophies embodied in two men who had both tasted failure but chosen vastly different paths. The audience, caught in the maelstrom, felt the tension ripple through their bones. Some laughed nervously, others gasped as reality twisted around them. The line between performance and existence blurred dangerously. Lola, Moss Silas, and even the reluctant Jinx watched from the shadows, their faces a mix of hope and fear. The outcome of this showdown would decide not just the fate of the laughter cabinet, but the very nature of the chaotic magic it held. In that charged moment, Eddie realized that this was no longer just about comedy or control. It was about embracing the unpredictable, the imperfect, the glorious failure that could reshape worlds. And so, with a deep breath and a heart pounding with paradoxical hope, Eddie prepared to bomb like never before, because in failure, he had found his greatest strength. The showdown had begun, and the laughter was about to change everything. The air was thick with tension, charged like the moment before a punchline lands or bombs spectacularly. Eddie Malone stood under the jaundiced glow of the stage lights in the laughter cabinet, the underground club that was less a venue and more a vortex of chaotic energy. Tonight wasn't just a set, it was a battleground. Victor Crane watched from the shadows, his sharp suit almost gleaming in the club's minimal light, a smirk playing at the edges of his lips. His gaze was cold, calculating, the kind of stare that could freeze laughter mid-gasp. He had made his move, and now it was time for Eddie to respond. Eddie squared his shoulders, the usual self-doubt momentarily drowned by a surge of reckless determination. He cleared his throat and launched into his opening joke, a deliberately awful, painfully awkward gag about a platypus running for president. The audience's reaction was immediate and visceral, faces contorted, jaws dropped, and the room's fabric began to ripple as if reality itself was hiccuping. Walls shimmered and bent like heat waves, colors bled in impossible gradients, and the crowd's expressions morphed into grotesque caricatures of shock and amusement. The club did not just hear the joke, it felt it, responded to it in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. Victor's lips curled into a sharper smirk. He stepped forward, his voice slicing through the surreal haze with a punchline meticulously crafted to cut. Why did the chicken cross the road? To escape the chaos you so desperately cling to. The air around him froze, laughter strangled into an eerie silence. Shadows stretched with unnatural length across the floor, creeping like dark fingers attempting to reclaim order. It was a battle of wills, chaos against control, absurdity against precision. Lola Sparks was a streak of color and energy amidst the turmoil. Her brightly dyed hair flashed as she maneuvered through the shifting landscape of warped reality, rallying the performers who had gathered like a ragtag army. Their voices rose in a chorus of meta jokes and improvised quips, weaving together a tapestry of defiance that pulsed with raw creative power. "You think you can cage the laughter?" Lola shouted, eyes gleaming. "This club is chaos incarnate." Each joke from Eddie and his allies sent ripples through the club's fabric. Timelines flickered, objects morphed, and the very air shimmered with possibility. The audience, now participants in this surreal performance, erupted in laughter that was both genuine and unnervingly otherworldly. Victor responded with measured precision, his retorts like calculated chess moves, each designed to tighten his grip on the club's reality. Yet the more he tried to impose order, the more the club resisted, a living organism fueled by the unpredictable power of bombing comedy. The climax of their duel was a dizzying volley of meta jokes, each layer peeling back the illusion of reality and performance. Eddie cracked a line about the absurdity of being a has-been who only succeeds in failure, twisting the concept until it became a weapon. Victor parried with a dark quip about the futility of rebellion beneath the weight of control. Suddenly, the ceiling above them cracked, a fracture that spread like a spiderweb, flooding the room with a kaleidoscope of shifting colors and laughter that echoed beyond the physical bounds of the club. Reality bent and swayed, a wild dance choreographed by the chaotic symphony of their words. In that moment, Eddie realized the true extent of his power. His failures were not weaknesses, they were forces of creation and destruction, a paradox that made him both vulnerable and invincible. The club was alive, breathing in the laughter and chaos, and he was its heart. Victor's smirk faltered, shadowed by the dawning understanding that control was slipping through his fingers like smoke. The battle was far from over, but the tide had shifted. As the laughter crescendoed, Eddie's voice rang out one last time, a punchline that blurred the lines between joke and reality. "If bombing is the art of failure, then consider this my masterpiece." The crowd erupted, the club pulsing with a wild, uncontainable energy. The fight had become a dance, a chaotic, hilarious, dangerous ballet of words and worlds, and Eddie Malone was leading. But as the echoes of laughter faded into the charged silence that followed, one question lingered in the air. Could he keep this fragile balance? Or would the next joke be the one that shatters everything? The stage was set, the players in motion, and the punchlines were ready to fly. The laughter cabinet was cracking. No, not in the metaphorical sense, though Eddie had learned to live with plenty of those, but quite literally. The walls, once solid brick and plaster adorned with faded posters of past performers, now shimmered in impossible hues, fracturing like glass under the pressure of some unseen force. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the floor and rattling the mismatched chairs scattered about the dimly lit space. Eddie stood amid the chaos, his breath shallow, eyes darting from one rippling fissure to another. "This isn't good," Lola said, her voice sharp against the unsettling backdrop. She tugged at her brightly dyed hair, her normally fierce eyes betraying a flicker of panic. "We were tearing the place apart." Eddie's ironic smile was gone, replaced by a grim line. "I know. Every time I bomb, it's like the club breathes in a little too hard and starts to break down. I thought I had a handle on this, the power, the chaos, but it's like holding water with a sieve." The floor beneath them quivered, and a crack slithered across the surface, glowing faintly with a spectral blue light. It spread quickly, as if reality itself was peeling back. Eddie stepped back, hand brushing against the cracked wall that whispered of other dimensions, somewhere absurd, somewhere terrifying. He had seen glimpses before, a clown juggling planets, an audience of faceless shadows, a punchline so sharp it cut through time. "Victor's been pushing too hard," Lola muttered. "His control games, trying to lock down the club's magic, it's destabilizing everything." Eddie's mind raced. Victor Crane, the tall, sharp-suited impresario with that cold, calculating smirk, had always been an ominous presence. But now his influence was literally fracturing their world. Eddie imagined Victor prowling the cracked corridors like a dark conductor, orchestrating the breakdown for his own gain. A sudden, chilling laugh echoed through the club, and Eddie turned to see Victor emerge from the shadows, hands clasped behind his back, eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. "Ah, Eddie," he said smoothly, "I see the cracks have begun to show. Quite fitting, don't you think? The old order breaking down, the chaos bubbling to the surface." Eddie clenched his fists. "You remaking it worse. This place won't hold if you keep pushing." Victor's smirk deepened. "Control isn't about holding on tightly, my friend. It's about knowing when to let go and when to squeeze." Before Eddie could respond, a sudden pulse rippled through the club. The air thickened, warping sounds into twisted echoes. A chandelier bent and stretched like taffy before snapping back. The audience seats folded inward, the wood grain swirling into faces that whispered strange jokes in tongues Eddie didn't understand. Lola grabbed Eddie's arm. "We need help. Now." From the back room came the steady thrum of machinery and softly modulated tones. Silas, the unassuming sound technician, was at his post, fingers dancing over the controls. The lights dimmed, and a subtle frequency filled the room, a gentle hum imbued with quiet magic. The cracks in the walls pulsed in response, flickering like candles in a storm. Nearby, Moss leaned on his cane, his bowler hat tilted just so, a perpetually raised eyebrow conveying a world of cryptic meaning. "Balance is a delicate dance," he intoned, voice thick with riddles. "You cannot fight chaos with control, nor control with chaos. You must find the rhythm between the two." Eddie nodded, swallowing his dread. "Then what do we do?" Moss smiled knowingly, the lines around his eyes deepening. "You already hold the key. Failure is your weapon, but it must be wielded with purpose. Bomb not to break, but to rebuild." The idea seemed absurd, yet in this place of warped realities and dangerous comedy, absurdity was the only truth. Eddie took a deep breath and stepped toward the nearest crack. He whispered to himself, a line of self-deprecating humor laced with determination. "Well, here goes nothing." As he spoke, the crack shimmered, the sharp edges softening, the spectral blue light fading to a warm amber glow. The club exhaled, the walls settling, the ripples smoothing. Eddie felt a surge of cautious hope. This was only the beginning, a fragile truce between order and chaos, comedy and catastrophe. But even as the club breathed easier, Eddie knew the fractures would return. Victor would not relent, and the battle for the laughter cabinet's soul was far from over. Yet, for the first time in a long while, Eddie felt ready. Ready to bomb with purpose, to wield failure as a strange sort of power, and to keep the cracks from consuming them all. The night hummed with possibilities, and the laughter, dark, absurd, dangerous, was far from over. The lights had dimmed to a soft, almost tender glow, and the usual buzz of the laughter cabinet had thinned to a hush. The crowd had long since dispersed, leaving Eddie Malone alone on the stage, the very heart of the club that was now as much a part of him as his own shadow. He sat on the edge of the worn wooden platform, the grain rough beneath his fingers, reflecting the countless nights of laughter and silence, of triumph and failure. Above him, the neon sign flickered faintly, a crooked grin in electric pink, mocking and comforting all at once. For a moment, Eddie allowed himself to simply be. No rehearsed jokes, no frantic rewrites, no desperate attempts to grasp the spotlight. Just the quiet company of an empty room that had seen too much of his worst and best. He let out a breath, uneven and heavy, the kind that carries the weight of years and mistakes. Funny, isn't it? He muttered to the empty seats, voice low and laced with irony. The one place where failing is your greatest power. And yet, it's the loneliest stage you will ever stand on. The silence seemed to answer in kind, stretching and folding around him like a thick velvet curtain. It was a loneliness born not of absence, but of necessity, a solitude carved out by the strange gift that only he possessed. The power to alter reality by bombing, to remake the world with failed punchlines and awkward pauses. It was a paradox that gnawed at him, a joke with no audience. Footsteps echoed softly from the wings, and Eddie's head snapped up. Lola Sparks emerged from the shadows, her bright hair a beacon in the dimness, her eyes sharp and alive. She didn't interrupt his reverie. Instead, she settled beside him, close enough to be a presence without forcing conversation. "You know," she said after a moment, voice low and steady, "this place. It listens, not just to the laughter, but to the silences too." Eddie gave a tired smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, and sometimes it's the silences that scream the loudest." Lola nudged him gently. "You don't have to carry it all alone." He shook his head, a wry chuckle escaping. "That's the catch, isn't it? I'm the keeper. The one who bombs so the joke can live. But in doing so, I'm stuck in a punchline that never ends." From the dim backstage, a familiar figure appeared, Moss, the enigmatic gatekeeper of the laughter cabinet. His bowler hat was tipped at a rakish angle, and his raised eyebrow seemed permanently etched with both amusement and sorrow. "Loneliness," Moss intoned, his voice a riddle wrapped in a joke, "is the punchline only the comedian hears. Yet, it is also the stage upon which the truest acts are performed." Eddie regarded him silently, the cryptic words settling like dust before a storm. Moss's presence was a reminder of the delicate balance they guarded, a chaos too wild for order, an order too cold for laughter. Alone again, Eddie's mind drifted backward to that televised meltdown that had shattered his career and nearly his soul. The memory was sharp, raw, a jagged edge beneath the ironic smile he wore like armor. Yet in that fractured past lay the seed of his power, the failure that birthed the absurd magic of the laughter cabinet. His thoughts spiraled into a surreal dialogue, a conversation between the man he was and the man he feared he would become. The ghosts of failed jokes and lost chances danced in the shadows, whispering truths about fear, hope, and the strange alchemy that turned failure into strength. Maybe, Eddie thought, the joke isn't just on the world, but on me too. And maybe that's where the real magic lies. The stage around him seemed to breathe, pulsing with a life all its own. The walls wavered faintly, colors shifting like the punchlines of a joke still unfolding. In that moment, Eddie felt the weight of his solitude not as a burden, but as a mantle, a role he was uniquely destined to play. He stood slowly, the creak of the stage a familiar companion. The ironic smile softened, touched with something fragile, a new acceptance. "All right," he whispered to the empty room, "let's see what kind of chaos we can make tonight." And with that, the loneliness was no longer silence. It was a stage set for the next act, a tale of absurdity, resilience, and the dangerous magic of bombing. The lights flickered once more, and somewhere deep within the club, the laughter began to stir anew. But as the echo of his footsteps faded into the shadows, a question lingered unspoken. How long could one man hold the balance between chaos and control before the laughter turned to silence forever? The joke was far from over. The narrow corridor behind the stage was a maze of shadows and flickering neon, the air thick with the scent of stale beer, sweat, and something indefinably electric. Lola Sparks stood still, her brightly dyed hair catching the intermittent glow as if it were on fire, her eyes sharp and unyielding despite the tremble in her hands. She whispered a vow under her breath, words half joking, half solemn, her voice barely audible over the distant murmur of the club. "Not on my watch, Victor, not today." The laughter cabinet had always been a strange place, but tonight the strangeness was tangible, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the scuffed floorboards. Victor Crane's shadow loomed large not just as a man, but as a force intent on reshaping this sanctuary of chaos into a cold monument of control. Lola knew what was at stake. The club was more than a venue. It was a crucible of absurdity and possibility, and if Victor succeeded, that magic would be snuffed out forever. As she moved deeper into the underground chambers, the walls seemed to hum with anticipation, an almost imperceptible vibration that set her nerves on edge. She wasn't alone. Figures clad in sharp suits Victor's enforcers patrolled the passageways, their cold eyes searching for signs of resistance. Lola's breath caught. This was a game of shadows and silence, and one wrong move could mean the end. Ahead, in the heart of the club's arcane core, Victor waited. He stood tall, the sharp lines of his suit almost too perfect, his smirk a frozen mask of calculated menace. The air between them crackled, thick with the unspoken battle of wills. "Lola," he said, voice smooth as silk, but laced with venom, "still clinging to your little rebellion. The club belongs to order now." To me, Lola's laugh was a razor's edge. "Order? You mean control? You want to turn this place into a mausoleum for jokes that don't dare to fail? You don't get it, Victor. Chaos is the heart here. Without it, this place dies." Victor's eyes narrowed. "And you think your antics will stop me?" She stepped forward, fearless despite the pounding in her chest. "Watch me." With a swift movement born of years, navigating the club's hidden alcoves, Lola reached a concealed panel embedded in the wall. Fingers trembling but steady, she pressed a sequence of buttons and levers, ancient mechanisms humming to life beneath her touch. The club responded instantly, lights flickered, the air shimmered, and the very fabric of reality rippled like a disturbed pond. Victor's smug expression faltered as the balance shifted beneath his feet. "What have you done?" "Protected it," Lola said simply, eyes blazing. "You can't cage chaos, Victor, not here." From the shadows, Eddie Malone watched the scene unfold, heart pounding in his chest. The club twisted and warped around Lola's, defiance colors bleeding into each other, shadows dancing with unnatural grace, laughter echoing in warped cadences that blurred the line between amusement and madness. He felt a surge of hope mingled with helplessness. Could they really hold the line? The confrontation escalated, voices rising in a symphony of biting sarcasm and raw emotion. Victor lunged, but the club's shifting reality disoriented him, the very walls seeming to resist his control. Lola's gamble bought time, but at a cost. Exhausted, she faltered, her legs nearly giving out beneath her. Eddie was there in an instant, catching her as she collapsed. The weight of the moment pressed down on them both, exhaustion, relief. Fear and the distant sounds of the club's patrons, gradually returning to their revelry, whispered through the walls like a fragile promise. "You did it," Eddie said quietly, voice thick with emotion. Lola smiled faintly, a warrior's smile edged with pain. "For now, but Victor's not done, not yet." The battle for the laughter cabinet was far from over. Yet in this moment of fragile victory, amidst the flickering lights and surreal echoes of laughter, a new hope glimmered, a hope born not from control, but from the fierce, unyielding spirit of those who dared to embrace the beautiful absurdity of failure. As Lola rested in Eddie's arms, the club's heartbeat steadied, But the coming storm loomed on the horizon, promising that the next act would be the most dangerous yet. And Eddie, with his ironic smile and wary eyes, knew that whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. The last laugh was not yet delivered. The backstage corridor smelled of damp concrete and old paint, but tonight it was electric with tension. Lola's footsteps echoed softly, a steady rhythm in the quiet chaos. She paused, pressing her back against the cool wall, closing her eyes to steady her breath. The faint hum of the club's magic vibrated beneath her skin, a reminder of what was at stake. She thought of Eddie, the man who had stumbled into this strange world and somehow become its reluctant hero. And she thought of Victor Crane, the shadow looming over them all, a man who had once been a comedian but had traded laughter for power. Lola's lips curled into a wry smile. The irony was not lost on her. "Time to make a stand," she whispered. Suddenly, footsteps approached, sharp, purposeful. She slipped into a narrow alcove, heart hammering. Two of Victor's enforcers passed, their eyes scanning the dim light. Lola held her breath, the seconds stretching thin. When they were gone, she moved swiftly, fingers flying over the hidden panel. The ancient mechanisms responded, gears turning, lights flickering, and the air shimmering with renewed energy. The chaotic magic surged, pushing back against the encroaching order. Victor's voice cut through the charged air. "You think you can stop the inevitable?" "I think," Lola said, voice steady, "that the inevitable isn't so inevitable after all." The club trembled, laughter warping into strange new rhythms. The battle lines were drawn, and though the night was far from over, Lola's last stand had given them a fighting chance. And in the shadows, Eddie prepared to step back into the fray, armed not with perfect jokes, but with the power of glorious failure and the strength of unwavering friendship. The laughter cabinet was alive, and the show was far from over.